While Denver Broncos rookie quarterback Bo Nix has been under focus here at training camp, some of the Broncos rookies from this year's draft class have also stood out, prompting praise from Sean Payton about impact years down the road. We'll break all that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode of the show, look, we all know Bo Nix has been the most talked about Broncos rookie on this roster as the quarterback competition goes on ahead of the Broncos' first preseason game. But what are some updates on other rookies that are not named Bo Nix? We'll dive deep into that. Plus, with an injury to Nik Bonitto that's been impacting him, how has Jonah Ellis looked with the outside linebacker group, including maybe some undrafted rookie free agents standing out there? And with the offense getting a little bit more in rhythm as each day goes, Audric Estime could find himself being the gem of this class outside of if Bo Nix lands as the team started quarterback. We'll break all that down here on today's episode of the show. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, longtime site expert, voice for Broncos Country at predominantlyorange.com. And make sure as you stay busy this summer, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, FanDuel Sportsbook. Stay involved with what FanDuel's got going on because every single day, all summer long, they have daily bonuses that they're handing out to all customers. So check it out at FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, Sayre, look, hey, training camp, we're entering our third week here. Monday morning, another practice. It's going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then on top of that, you're going to have a Saturday travel day, Sunday preseason. And we are back in action. It's been a trek here. There's been, I think, 2.5 weeks really of good evaluation on this roster from start to acclimation period to now. And this rookie class, I think we'll open things up here on the offensive side of the ball, like really focus on some of the offensive players that the Broncos drafted. I think it's good to do a check-in progress report here at this point in time.
I think so too. And I'm glad you mentioned this in the opening because I didn't think about putting this in the notes I should have, but with Sean Payton in the comments that he made to, I believe it was Cynthia Freeland over there at NFL Network, and the little segment that he had. And he's like, I was talking to Greg Penner and I was telling him we're going to look back on this rookie class years from now and talk about the impact that this group made. And he referenced his 2006 draft class with the Saints, as well as his 2017 class with the Saints. If you know anything about those classes, I can't remember the word that he used to describe them. It was basically like, benchmark class or something like that. Maybe somebody in the comments remembers the exact words that he used, but it was essentially him saying, like, this class that we have for the Denver Broncos right now, like, this is going to be the one that helps build something special here is the way that I perceived that comment. And it starts offensively. Of course, we talked about Bo Nix, not ad nauseum on the show. I think everybody likes to hear about the Bo Nix updates. I like it when Bo Nix is practicing well. So I want to hear about what's going on with him, but it's easy to kind of forsake the other rookies on this team offensively. I agree with you. I think Audric Estime could be the gem of this class. And he's somebody that's really stood out over these first, 8, 9 days, 10 days of training camp at this point now. Where are we even at right now, Cody? I mean,
we're going into Monday. Today's practice here on Monday is going to be day 11 overall of training camp. So it's been a haul. And I'll say this about Audric, right? And this is what you love because, like in the regular season, this is going to be something you love about him, that he's on your team. He's kind of pissing guys off a little bit, right? Because he's big, he's physical. Like, yes, the pads are on. There's physicality. And now obviously, nobody's going to the ground. Audric's just not letting them do run bys. Like, if they're going to come and try to embrace contact with him, he's lowering his shoulder. So he is making some guys mad a little bit. But it's like, that's what is going to make the defensive guys to have to go against him better. But I think it's just a kind of a little bit of an appetizer. I think we are going to see a lot of like physical runs here, some potential angry runs from Audric Estime this upcoming season. I think he's had a terrific start to camp here, Sayre. And look, I think as we dive deeper into these practices, you just want to see steady growth from them, right? More comfortability, knowing the scheme and obviously knowing what their roles are and going out there and executing it. Estime has been very, very fun to watch. I will say that. And obviously we're going to see him this week in the preseason. But I think for him coming off the knee surgery that he had here during OTAs, doesn't seem like it's bothering him at all, even though he did have a day where Sean Payton said, hey, anyone who's had surgery we're going to give them down days just because we believe in body maintenance and just making sure things are there. But I don't. I know one thing we put in the show notes here is he a factor to maybe start in the regular season. I don't think right away, but I think he could. But I think right now, I mean, Javante's had a terrific camp, so I'm not even like Audric can one day, I think, be a starter. I don't think it's going to be this year.
And I wonder what his role is going to be in this backfield, just in general, when you talk about divvying up carries and things like that, and touches in general, because he may get involved as a receiver as well. But Javonte having a good camp, Jalil McLaughlin, we talked about it last week on the show a couple of times that Sean was really hyping him up as well. You know, the only guy that shows up after the security guard who's there 24/7 is Jalil McLaughlin, right? So he's second to almost nobody on the entire organization in terms of when he gets to the building, but sounds like he's had a good camp as well. So I wonder where Estime factors in. Are the Broncos going to fabricate touches for him? Are they going to kind of run with a hot hand sort of mentality? I'm going to be interested to see if he can force the issue in the preseason with the way that he runs the ball.
I think so much of it, I think it's going to be schematic, like situational, like, you know, if you get past the 50-yard line or, you know, let's say you're on, you know, you have a drive that, you know, you're on your 7th play of the drive, you're approaching midfield or just past midfield. You're like, oh, hey, that defense is probably tired a little bit. He's going to run through dudes. And there might even be a situation where we see he and Javonte at the same time on the field, which I would love, a 2-back set with those two guys there. But, you know, we got to crawl before we walk here. I just think that he is going to have some manufactured looks. I think so much it's going to be situational, right? Maybe goal line. You know, I think Javonte is going to be a great contender for goal line this year. But maybe it's like, all right, hey, we want to wear you down. Like he's hard to bring down. Like red zone situations, perfect. You want to be able to get him in the mix there. He's got good vision, and I'd say it's very, very under the radar in that regard. So I'm also excited about Audric. Let's talk about maybe a couple of these other wide receivers here that are obviously in the rookie class. Talk about Troy Franklin, Devon Vele. Troy Franklin, I think Troy's going to take some time, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that Denver's in a position right now, Sayre, where you have Cortland Sutton, you have Tim Patrick, you have Marvin Mims, you have Josh Reynolds. You have a solidified top 4 right now in terms of who's going to get probably the most looks this season. That means that Troy doesn't necessarily have to be a guy that has to step in right now and just be, you know, become a number 1 or a number 2. Like he's not in that position right now, nor does he need to be. He has struggled with some drops, but, you know, it's like, people talk about the drops. It's not like it's like he's dropping like 2 or 3 passes in a row. It's like he has one here and there. They're like occasional drops. And obviously you got to get that out. You can't have that come into the regular season. Granted, there's going to be some drops that happen. Ideally, you want to stand under the threshold of 5 drops per year, right? Like that's like the sweet spot. Ideally, in a perfect world, no drops at all. But Troy's in a position right now. He's still learning. He's still growing. He's still making some plays, but he is kind of impacted a little bit here by an occasional drop. That definitely is something he's going to have to fix. And then Devon Vele, I think, is primarily, you know, he's going to be a guy I think we'll see shine a little bit in the preseason. But watch for him, I think, more so on special teams as a gunner right now, I think, in terms of his best opportunity to showcase making the roster.
He's in a really intriguing position to me in terms of, I think that's one of the preseason battles that I'm most looking forward to, is that 6th wide receiver spot, which I think is going to be the final one on this roster. I don't know that for fact or anything like that, but it feels like that's typically what you do. I mean, they could sacrifice elsewhere. So if Devon Vele has practiced as well as we've heard from at times from Sean Payton, I mean, the comparisons to Tim Patrick have been thrown out there by Sean Payton. And I know that every rookie is at a different stage, but you also drafted a guy who's 26 years old. So I don't know how much more seasoning he's going to be able to really get realistically. So that's one of those position groups that I'm going to be locked into, as if I'm not already. I love, everybody knows I love the wide receiver position, but that competition in particular is one of the most fascinating going into the preseason games.
It's going to be important. And I think that's one of the things we're going to have to like dive into. Like, you look, we evaluate practice, folks, and this is a conversation that's kind of applies to the whole roster. We talk about the practice and guys stepping up, right? But ultimately, all this needs to translate to a game, or the things that they're not doing well. You could have a player who's not practicing well, but all of a sudden in a game, boom, bright lights are on. They shine. Or like it could be the opposite. The bright lights come on and they're having great practices, but the bright lights come on and they certainly can't, you know, they're not stepping up to the occasion in those situations. Definitely, like, there are scenarios where that does happen, but I think overall this class is in the right direction. A lot of these guys aren't in a position where they need to start right now, which is good, right? Sean Payton talks about building foundationally. That's important. Look, those are offensive players here for the Broncos, which we'll continue to highlight here. But what about the defensive side of the ball for this year's rookie class? Jonah Ellis, one of the players we have our eyes on, has an opportunity with an injury to the position. We'll highlight what he's done, how he's looked so far, and other defensive rookies here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it, right? But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever, right? And it's helpful for us to learn positive coping skills, to learn how to set boundaries. Therapy empowers us to be the best version of ourselves. And it isn't just for those who have experienced major trauma or anything like that. If you're thinking at all of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Nik Bonitto hasn't been practicing for the Denver Broncos, which means that rookie pass rusher Jonah Ellis has been getting some increased snaps along with the other players at that group. We're going to talk about Jonah Ellis as well as his 2024 rookie classmate Chris Abrams Drain and what those two guys have brought to the defense so far in training camp. But I want to say thank you to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And you everydayers know you got to hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you haven't, go check out the YouTube page where we're on the road to 15,000 subscribers. Broncos Country, we appreciate you so much for rocking with us every single day here on the show as we get into the rest of training camp, preseason games. You want to know everything that's going on with the Denver Broncos, and we've got you covered every single day. Jonah Ellis, Cody, is a legacy, one of many legacy players in this year's rookie class, which I found to be fascinating. You got Marvin Harrison's kid in there. I believe Frank Gore's kid was in the draft, and Jonah Ellis. There's plenty of
Jerry
them.
Rice's kid.
Jerry Rice's kid, and so it's kind of a fun rookie class from that perspective. But Jonah Ellis was the Broncos' second pick in this draft. And we know that they valued him highly because Sean Payton said they were going to just straight up take Troy Franklin with that 76th overall pick. But Jonah Ellis being there shifted the way that they planned everything. So I like the idea drafting an edge guy. But when you look at this group on paper, it seemed like it was going to be tough for him to get on the field. But Nik Bonitto, unfortunately, missing time has caused Ellis to get some more reps at practice.
Yeah, and look, Bonitto's been dealing with what Sean Payton has told us is a little bit of a back injury, back issues, and obviously that's something to monitor because that can pop up from time to time. I mean, DeMarcus Ware, as great as he was as a Denver Bronco, the one thing that got in his way a litlittle bit that hurt him, and I think hurt the Broncos in some games, was the fact that he had back spasms all the time. And I don't know if it's spasms, I don't know what it is, but the Broncos are being smart. They're monitoring it. But it is, you do get a look now at your rookie, right? What is he doing so far? And I would say maybe his first week at training camp, Ellis was kind of quiet, not as visual or like you see him stand out in a sense the way I think we saw in OTAs. But I'd say this last week with the injury to Bonitto, I think Ellis has been doing really well. He's been getting rotational reps with the second team defense. There's been times where he's also been on the field opposite Jonathan Cooper in certain situations. Like they're just trying to get guys as many reps as possible. I think the one thing I see from Jonah Ellis that I do like is that he's consistent on the edge as a run stuffer in terms of being able to set the edge there. And if something tries to get outside, he does a really good job of tracking and making sure he doesn't lose contain. I think we are going to see just more confidence come from him once we start seeing some preseason games. And look, obviously this Sunday, they travel on the road to take on the Indianapolis Colts. You get the complete post-game recap here, Locked On Broncos. But Jonah Ellis is in a position where I think he'll be in the rotation at the outside linebacker position. And obviously Bonitto's injury is something to monitor. And if that's something that lingers, he may be the first guy off the bench at the outside linebacker position to step into that role. And then obviously there's going to be some other roster gymnastics, which we'll talk about, maybe maybe an undrafted guy who stood out here in practice so far. We'll highlight a little bit later on. But I think we're going to watch him in the preseason. I want to see how he does against the run. I want to see how he does in terms of rushing the quarterback, the way that we've seen a little bit early on. I think this is going to be a big week of practice for him. And I think ultimately we're going to get a little bit of a taste of maybe what he can bring to the rotation here for Denver, because starters are going to play, but the backups are going to play quite a bit in week one against the Colts.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see this rookie class finally on display. Of course, we're all excited to see Bo Nix out there, but the entire rookie class, it's going to make the preseason must watch for just about everybody. I think that even people who aren't interested in the preseason typically are going to be locked in to see this rookie class out there, which, Chris Abrams drain. I'll be honest, Cody, when the Broncos drafted him, I was kind of just like almost white noise. They always draft a defensive back at some point in between rounds 3 and 5.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't like him as a player, but it just feels like, hey, we got to draft a DB. We haven't drafted a DB yet. So they draft Chris Abrams drain. That pick flew under the radar based on you just took a quarterback, you took the pass rusher, you traded up for Troy Franklin. Then it's kind of Audric Estime is exciting to everybody. And then it's like, and then there's Chris Abrams drain. And you kind of just, I forgot about it a little bit. Not that I forgot about him, but that pick wasn't necessarily on the same level of intrigue as the others. Sean Payton talked about how he's kind of taken leaps and bounds from OTAs and what he's doing. He talked about him playing his role really well right now. What do you think that's going to be? Is he competing for a job in the top 4 rotation? Like, is he competing for a dime role, special teams? What do you think for Chris Abrams drain in year 1?
Yeah, I still think there's a lot to work with. And one thing that Sean Payton applauded him on was that, from the spring to when he first came into the building to now, he's gotten more comfortable knowing the defensive scheme. The vision for him, as Sean said, is kind of like inside out. Like, he can play inside the nickel. He can play on the outside if you need him to. And I think that's obviously something to monitor here. And in terms of like expectations here, maybe as a rookie, in terms of the top 4, who are we thinking right now? I mean, if we're talking about cornerback depth specifically, it's going to be Patrick Surtain. It's going to be these 3 guys are going to make the 53, in my opinion, regardless. Damari Mathis, Riley Moss, Levi Wallace. There's the top 4 guys right there. Jaquan McMillan, 5th. I think he is kind of competing really for that maybe 6th spot or maybe even a 7th spot. I don't know how many corners they plan to carry. Like, it's hard, right? And the thing I look at with him is he's a talented player. He's smart, but with the Broncos cornerback depth the way that it is now, you have Levi Wallace on a 1-year deal. You have Riley Moss for a couple more years, and obviously you want to see him continue to make strides. Damari Mathis, I believe, I think after this year, after next season is kind of when his contract essentially will be up, his rookie deal. So you have windows with these guys. For me, it could be a red shirt year here for Chris Abrams drain, unless he comes out in the preseason, he's making plays. Let's say he gets 1 interception, but has maybe 4 or 5 passes defensed here in the preseason, and is playing special teams as a gunner or a jammer, and he's doing a good job. Then I think the conversation changes a little bit. He could end up just being a redshirt year for him. And look, I hate to even like bring this up, but I also think as well, like, there is competition there for his spot, because Reese Taylor, a guy who was on the roster last year, has had a very under the radar training camp here defensively for the Broncos. Just played on the nickel, can play on the outside. That's where I think there's competition, and Reese has made some more plays in camp. He stood out a little bit, whereas we haven't necessarily seen too many plays made by Abrams drain, but that doesn't mean that he's not having a good camp. And I think that's just the thing that, if we're like, oh, if we're not seeing anything, then obviously nothing good's happening. That could be a total fallacy in a sense. There's so many different plays and reps that are happening. It's hard to track everything, but we do remember the plays made. I chart every play at practice, and obviously we'll go over things like that once we hear it. But this could be a redshirt year for Chris Abrams drain, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing.
No, and I don't think I think it would be actually kind of a good thing, unless he really breaks through and ends up like, a Chris Harris Jr. type of situation where as a rookie, you're just like, man, we can't keep this guy off the field. Unless you get something like that, I almost think it's good for, Chris Abrams drain to come in, get some experience on special teams. And if he's not playing early on, it means that somebody above him is playing well, most likely. That's what I would be most excited about is Damari Mathis, Riley Moss, Levi Wallace, Jaquan McMillan. You need somebody from that group, 2 somebodies more than likely, to step up and really play substantial roles for you. So if Chris Abrams drain isn't playing, I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing.
No, I don't think so either. And look, all these things could change, right? I said it earlier. We're watching practices. We're charting guys who maybe make plays at practice. Okay, we're keeping guys who aren't making plays, not necessarily a bad thing, right? The one thing I don't think you want to see is like someone else is making a play on you in a sense. So Haven't really seen anything like that yet. So it's like, all right, hey, the preseason is where our evaluation of all these players really matters. Like we're supposed to cover what we see at practice, right? And we're supposed to talk about it. I mean, that's our job here. But where everything matters is the game, which happens this Sunday. The Broncos on the road, Indianapolis. Coles, you get an immediate post-game report here, Locked On Broncos. So, I mean, a lot to break down there. And look, I think really outside of this year's rookie class, we could take a look at undrafted rookie free agents on this roster. There's a pass rusher there who's been making plays. We'll highlight Jalil Allen, what we've seen from him in the last week, and also highlight maybe some of the other standouts there and guys who are returning to practice from injury like Blake Watson. You're going to get all that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And, I love sports. I know you do too. We love them so much. We never want them to stop. And thankfully, the NFL offseason, it's almost completely over. Denver Broncos preseason football is just about back. But sometimes when sports are not sportsing like you want them to, you need FanDuel. And FanDuel lets us keep sports going whenever we want. All you got to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And if you're a Denver Broncos fan like me, you're feeling pretty confident about what the team is doing this season. Maybe you want to go check out FanDuel where you got plus 650 odds at the Broncos having the worst record in the NFL. Maybe you want to lay a little money on them not having the worst record in the NFL. Or maybe you want to talk about, I don't think the Broncos are going to be at that over under 5.5 wins. I'm smashing the over on that one. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
As we jump in the fourth quarter action on today's episode of the show, we're going to take a look at some of the undrafted rookie free agents that the Broncos added this offseason, including a player who's coming back from an injury, trying to get in the mix, and one rookie who was drafted who seemingly hasn't found himself in the mix just yet. We'll break that down here on today's episode of the show. Just want to say thanks once again to all the everydayers out there. Thanks for making us your first listen, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get into this undrafted rookie class here. I think there's several players that have made some plays that have stood out in practice. We talk about these different positions here. I want to start off with the edge rusher position. Obviously, we talked about the Nik Bonitto injury, and obviously that means that, hey, Chris, you look at a guy like Jonah Ellis, he's going to have a little bit more of a jump forward, right? Especially if this is an injury, which we don't know how long it's going to impact Bonitto. But if this holds him out for time, Jonah Ellis elevates to a new position, but you need another pass rusher if there's going to be time that Bonitto does expect to miss with this, or they're going to be smart with bringing him back. That's why I've been pretty pleased. Look, Thomas Incomb's not an undrafted rookie free agent this year, was last year, made the 53. Incomb's had a tremendous training camp from a pressure standpoint, but he's also got a competition from Jalil Allen, this year's undrafted rookie free agent as well, who's just kind of come out of nowhere, getting pressure. He had a field day, I think, on Saturday against Frank Crum on the offensive side. He would have had what was a stuffy tackle for a loss about 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage on one play, and then he sacked. It would have been a strip sack on Zach Wilson during there, but obviously these guys aren't allowed to touch the quarterback. So he came around the edge on Frank Crum. He brings his hand out, and Zach Wilson's got the ball up close like he's getting ready to throw it. And Jalil Allen puts his hand over the ball, doesn't touch Zach, but it's over there. And then he pulls it back, and then he stops because you're not allowed to touch the QBs. And then Zach, from that point, would then roll and then try to throw it. But it's like, that's a strip sack in a game. So it's a good play to see from him. Makes me happy because then it's like, all right, hey, now we're on undrafted rookie watch. The Broncos have found guys in the preseason and training camp that have made a roster every single year. There could be a very good chance of that happening this year.
Yeah, they always seem to find some guys with traits there after the draft that can rush the passer. It feels like they've been on kind of a heater through the years a little bit in terms of finding these guys, which is really fun because pass rushers, every team wants them. Every team needs them. You need to bring pass rush in waves. And for the Broncos to somehow continually be finding guys after the draft is pretty impressive. When you look at Jalil Allen, spent the last 5 years at Memphis, had 7 tackles for loss last year, 10 tackles for loss the year before, 7.5 tackles for loss the year before that. I mean, he only had 13 sacks over his time there, but certainly there's a lot to work with in terms of the overall package. Had a couple of defensive touchdowns, a couple of forced fumbles, interception, fumbles, so he's all over the place kind of making plays at the college level. But when you get a guy like that into an NFL camp, that's when things really become interesting, because you can start stacking those reps up against backup offensive linemen. Feels like a lot of times the backup edge rushers have a huge edge, no pun intended, over those backup offensive linemen when it comes to preseason games. So we'll kind of see what Jalen Allen can bring to the table. I'm interested too by Lavelle Bailey. I know that Sean made mention of him earlier this offseason, Cody. I don't know what all he's been doing out there. That's a pretty, to me, wide open competition at linebacker. I think if anybody was able to really step in and say, all right, you've got the best chance of making an impact on defense this year, it might have been that guy. What have you seen from Lavelle Bailey so far? Has he made enough plays to maybe make a case?
Yeah, no, I think there's a case to be made, and preseason is obviously going to factor in. I think right now it's the top three linebackers at that room is going to be Alex Singleton, Jonas Griffith, and Cody Barton. Those last two I mentioned in no particular order. They've both been getting reps with the first team defense as they really try to figure out who the starter is going to be. Justin Sternad had a groin injury that popped up, and obviously that's impacting him. He's one of Mike Westhouse's favorite special teams guys. You can definitely tell. So it's like, all right, are you uprooting him? Do you keep 5 inside linebackers? If you do, Lavelle Bailey makes the roster, no question, in terms of that, because you need good depth. You need guys that can play special teams, but he also has traits that I feel like you let him out of the building in a sense. There's a team like, and obviously in the next week, like preseason is really your danger zone, right? The Colts are going to be watching and scouting. You're going to have the Packers. They're going to be watching this game on Sunday and scouting, and they're also going to be joint practices the week afterwards, watching and scouting potential players. And Lavelle Bailey's the type of guy I feel like, Sayre, if the Broncos were to test the waters there, and look, I know there's a myth versus perception here. Like anytime roster cuts happen, you trim to 53, you're like, oh, this guy's probably going to get picked up. The guys usually we think are going to get picked up don't normally get picked up. Like that's just the common nature of it, even though it's a stressful exercise. Because hey, what if he does get picked up? Well, then, oh shoot, you just lost a good player. And Sean is very adamant about, we don't want a player who's in our building to go elsewhere and all of a sudden play when we had him in the building, and said like, why, he's having success. Where do we go wrong in our evaluation, right? Is it us? Is it the system? Sean wants to avoid that at all costs. Lavelle is very instinctual, fast, athletic. I think if they do keep 5 Sayre, you're going to see that situation where it is going to be maybe 5 inside linebackers, which I'm not opposed to right now. If I'm not mistaken, they did. I think they had that last year, if I'm not mistaken. I think they had 5 guys at the position. In fact, and I can't remember the guys. Ben Neiman, I think, was the 5th guy at that room. So, yeah, something we'll factor in, obviously, the consideration here. We'll keep going through. Like him, Omar Brown, more than likely, in my opinion, probably could end up being a practice squad guy here. The Broncos' defensive backfield right now has a lot of depth. Cornerback, safety, even though safety, you and I are kind of in agreement. It's a little like, we're a little uncertain about it. Like you have one injury there. We're a little worried about maybe what direction they can go. So let's talk about Blake Watson here real quick. Blake Watson obviously returned to practice last week for the first time after coming off the NFI list, had a calf injury. First day was a rough day for him. His first day in terms of like doing football stuff once again. Had a couple of drops, then, didn't have some looks, but I think he's getting more progress, right? So I think our grading curve, our evaluation of him is going to change. You're going to have practice this week. We're going to see him play a lot in the preseason. To me, that's where it's going to matter.
Yeah, it's huge for him because when you get those carries, you get those touches. I think people are going to see the number 43. They're going to be talking Darren Sproles if he's out there making plays. That's just you connect the Sean Payton dots, right? And so Blake Watson was everybody's most exciting undrafted rookie free agent pick for the most part. When you talk about this guy probably should have been drafted. I think Dane Brugler had him as a 4th round potential draft pick out of Memphis there, where, he transferred from Old Dominion, was a wide receiver, and Sean Payton noted at rookie minicamp the fact that, like, when you watch him, the first thing that you're looking at is those strong hands, the pass catching ability. But he continually referenced, Alvin Kamara when he brings up Blake Watson, not saying he's comparing him to that, but he's saying, like, when we brought in Kamara, we thought we had this pass catcher. All of a sudden, he takes a run off the tackle, and all of a sudden now he's involved in the running game mix. So Blake Watson could be a similar type of guy where you're envisioning something as a receiver, as a pass catcher. Then all of a sudden in the preseason, he goes off. And Sean has talked about not only Kamara's preseason, but Jalil McClain last year against the 49ers going off as well. So Blake Watson does still have an opportunity, even after starting the training camp on the non-football injury list, which I don't even know if we ever did find out what that was, but he's back out there at practice.
It was his calf.
His calf. Okay. So him and Russell Wilson dealing with the calf issues at training camp right now, but we'll keep tabs on Russell from afar. We don't need to be talking smack on this podcast, but I'm excited to see Blake Watson. And I think that he's going to be a fun, maybe one of the top 3 to 5 players on my list for a preseason watch list.
Love that. No, and I think that's great. And I think this rookie class, I'll highlight it. I agree with you. We're all going to watch Nix and Estime, but like guys, I'm like, hey, pay attention to. I think that Troy Franklin will be a preseason stud alongside Devon Vela. I think they'll really probably have a chance to showcase more what they can do in preseason versus what we get in practice. Abrams Drain, we're going to watch him. I think Lavelle Bailey is going to be the guy. And then I think Blake Watson is a guy that we're going to be watching a lot of here during the preseason, which, hey, it is game week, Broncos country. I don't know if you're ready for it. I know Sayre and I, we are. We're excited about it. We can't wait to break it all down this week as we continue on here. One little quick update. Nick Gargiulo, obviously a late-round draft pick here for the Broncos, interior offensive lineman. Haven't seen a lot of him. He's been working on the side field for the past week and a half. Hasn't really gotten involved in team periods. He'll do individual from time to time, but mainly works on the side field. So we have no idea. Like, there's no injury report that comes out just yet. But I think as the preseason happens, I think we are mandated now to get an injury report as it goes. So we'll continue to monitor that. No further update there as well here. But obviously, it's Monday. The Broncos will have practice day 11 of Broncos training camp. Sayre Bedinger, myself, will break down all the action following practice once I get home from Dove Valley. Looking forward to breaking it down here. And look, the Broncos quarterback competition, it could be nearing its conclusion here very, very shortly. We'll continue to monitor that and much more as the Broncos prepare for game week here. You get that on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.